The desert stretched wide and endless beneath a pale American sun, its golden dust carrying the scent of old battles and buried secrets. Wind whispered across the dunes, stirring dry brush and the ghostly remains of wagon trails long abandoned. Somewhere between the silence and the breath of the land, a woman's heartbeat quickened. Her hand trembled as she pressed the cold barrel of a revolver against her chest, her lips barely parting to whisper words that tasted of fear and fate. "Don't kiss me. I must kill you." The Apache before her froze, his dark eyes steady but soft, as if the weight of her trembling soul was something he had already carried once before. She wasn't born for this kind of land. The cracked earth and burning sun were made for men who tamed wild horses and hunted shadows across the canyon, but she had come anyway, running from something too heavy to name. Her dress, once white, was now marked with dust and dried sweat. Her hair clung to her face as the wind lifted, revealing eyes that were far too sad for someone so young. The Apache, tall and broad as the mountains that watched over them, stood silent. His chest rose with slow, deliberate breaths, the kind that came from years of surviving where most men perished. Between them, the revolver glinted a thin line between life and what came after. She had met him 3 nights ago, when the desert sky had burned red with lightning. Her horse had fallen, and her wagon lay shattered near a ravine. She thought she would die there alone beneath the cruel stars. But then she saw him, a figure emerging from the storm, his silhouette lit by firelight, his hair damp with rain. He hadn't spoken at first, only looked at her as though she were a vision he didn't trust. When she fainted, he caught her before she hit the ground. She woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of a low voice singing in a language she didn't know. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language she had ever heard, but it was beautiful. It felt like a prayer meant for the dead and, maybe for her. By dawn, she learned his people had once ruled these lands before the soldiers came. He told her stories in broken English, his voice low and quiet like the hum of distant thunder. She listened, though every word seemed to pierce deeper into her heart. She was supposed to fear him. He was the enemy her father had warned about since she was a child. "Apaches take no mercy," he had said. "If you see one, shoot first." But the man before her didn't match the stories. His scars told of pain, not cruelty. His silence spoke of patience, not rage. And when he handed her a cup of water, their fingers brushed, and she felt something she shouldn't have, something dangerous and warm, like the spark that lights a fuse. The sun climbed higher now, painting their faces gold. The revolver between them felt heavier than it should. He took a step closer. She raised the gun. Her arms shook. He didn't stop. "Go," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, I told you, I must kill you." Her eyes filled with tears that had been waiting too long to fall. The Apache didn't move away. His gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment time forgot how to move. The wind died, and all that remained was the sound of 2 hearts, one trembling, one steady. He finally spoke, his voice low and calm. "Then do it," he said. "But look at me when you do." She couldn't. Not because she feared him, but because she feared herself. Her chest ached with the truth she hadn't yet spoken. He was the one she had been sent to find, the one her brother had died chasing, the one the soldiers had paid her to betray. Every night she had prayed she wouldn't find him, and yet here he was, standing in front of her with eyes that saw more than words ever could. She wanted to tell him everything, that she wasn't like the others, that she had never meant to come this far. The gun wasn't meant for him. It was meant for the man who had ordered her to find him. But words caught in her throat. The desert wasn't a place for confessions. It was a place for choices. When he reached for the gun, she didn't pull away. His hand was warm, rough from years beneath the sun. He pushed the barrel aside gently, his fingers brushing hers. "If you wanted to kill me," he said, "you would have done it before dawn." The way he said it wasn't a challenge. It was a truth. She wanted to argue, but her heart betrayed her. He was right. She couldn't kill him. Not after the way he had carried her from the storm, not after the night he had sung to her while she lay shivering by the fire, not after he had looked at her like she was something worth saving. The ground shifted under her. Memory surfaced her father's voice, cold and certain. "You'll do it for the money," he had said. "You'll lead him into the canyon and fire when the sun rises. The Apache must die before the soldiers arrive." She had agreed. She thought it was justice. But now, standing before him, Nothing felt just anymore. A hawk cried somewhere above them. Sound broke the silence like glass. He turned his head, scanning the horizon. She saw it too, the dust rising in the distance. Soldiers, they were coming. Her chest tightened. She had led them straight to him. He turned back to her, eyes narrowing. "You brought them?" His voice wasn't angry, only tired. "I didn't mean to," she said. "They followed me." Her words stumbled over the truth. "I didn't know they'd come this fast." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. For the first time, she saw fear flicker behind his calm. "They won't stop," he said. "They never do." His hand brushed the revolver, but she caught his wrist. "If you fight, they'll kill you," she whispered. "If you run, I can help you." He looked at her, searching her face. "Why would you help a man you came to kill?" Her breath hitched. She didn't know the answer. Maybe it was because she saw something in him that reminded her of the person she had once been, before the world hardened her heart. Maybe it was because his kindness had undone everything she thought she knew about enemies. Or maybe it was because she had already fallen in love with him, and she hated herself for it. The soldiers were closer now. She could hear the faint rhythm of hooves and the metallic clatter of rifles. Time was slipping away. "Go," she said again, pushing him toward the rocks. "There's a path behind the ridge. It leads to the river." He hesitated, studying her trembling face. "What about you?" he asked. "They'll think I killed you," she said. "It's better that way." She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll be safe." He didn't move. "You can't stay," he said. "They'll hang you for helping me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'll take my chances." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon in amber and fire. He reached out and touched her cheek, his hand gentle. "You don't belong in their world," he said softly. "Neither do you," she replied. The distance between them closed like a breath. She felt the warmth of him, the pull of something she couldn't explain. But before he could lean closer, before their lips could meet, she raised the revolver again, not at him, but at the approaching dust cloud. Her voice shook as she whispered the words that would haunt them both. "Don't kiss me. Must kill you." The Apache fell silent, his eyes filled with something deeper than fear understanding. The wind carried the first echo of gunfire across the plains. He turned toward it, ready to fight. She turned away, tears burning her cheeks. Somewhere between love and duty, the desert held its breath. The story had just begun. The echo of the first gunshot faded into the dry air, swallowed by the desert's endless silence. Dust rose like a curtain between them, and for a heartbeat neither moved. The Apache's body tensed, his hand hovering near the knife strapped to his thigh. The woman's eyes darted toward the ridge, where distant-shaped soldiers were beginning to break through the shimmering heat. The faint glint of sunlight on their rifles told her there wasn't much time. She could feel her heartbeat pulsing through her wrist, where the revolver rested, still warm from her grip. The weight of her choice pressed heavier than the gun itself. He stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "You don't have to do this." She didn't answer. Words would only slow her down now. Her mind was tangled between what she had promised and what her heart refused to accept. The soldiers were coming because of her. Every echo of hoofbeats was a reminder that she had betrayed the only man who had ever saved her without wanting anything in return. 3 nights earlier, when she had first stumbled into his camp, she had thought he was going to kill her. His tribe had been hunted nearly to extinction, their villages burned, their families scattered. He had every reason to hate her kind. But instead of hatred, she found quiet strength in him. He had bound her wounded ankle with cloth torn from his own shirt and sat through the night without sleep, watching the horizon as if expecting ghosts to rise from the sand. He hadn't asked for her name, only if she could ride by morning. When she asked why he helped her, his answer had been simple, because no one else would. That night, as the fire cracked softly between them, she learned that his people had once lived freely beyond the canyons, where the rivers ran wild and the wind carried the songs of children. Then the soldiers came, and everything changed. His father was shot for refusing to leave their homeland. His mother died on the trail during winter when the army forced them into camps. He escaped, though he carried a bullet scar near his shoulder that never let him forget. He told her he had stopped believing in mercy a long time ago, and yet he had shown her more mercy than any man she had ever known. The soldiers drew nearer, their shouts faint but clear. She turned to him. "They'll kill you if they find you here." He didn't flinch. "Then I'll take some with me." She shook her head, desperate. "No, listen, there's still time to run." He looked toward the sun, his expression unreadable. "I've been running all my life," he said. "Maybe this is where it ends." Something inside her broke. She had spent years believing that right and wrong were easy to tell apart, that her father's word was law, that killing an Apache meant justice. But now justice felt like a lie told by men in uniforms who had never seen the look in a dying man's eyes. The world wasn't made of heroes and villains, it was made of survivors. And somehow, she wanted him to survive more than she wanted her own redemption. "Come with me," she whispered. "There's a trail behind the ridge that leads to an old well. If we reach it before sunset, we can lose them." He studied her face, his brow furrowed. "Help me now." She swallowed hard. "Because I can't watch another good man die for something he didn't start." He didn't argue. Instead, he nodded once, sharp and silent, and turned toward the ridge. Together they moved through the sand, their footsteps quick but cautious. The heat pressed down like an invisible hand. Sweat stung her eyes, and the revolver in her hand felt heavier with every step. Behind them, the soldiers' voices grew louder, carried by the wind. As they climbed, her mind drifted back to the day she accepted the deal. The memory cut like glass. The officer's tent smelled of gunpowder and tobacco. He had looked at her with a smirk, sliding a leather pouch of coins across the table. "All you have to do," he'd said, "is lead him to us. The Apache calls himself Taza. We've been hunting him for months. Do this, and your father's debts disappear." She had hesitated then, her heart pounding, but her father's face flashed in her mind, tired, broken, desperate. She told herself it was the right thing, that she was saving her family. She hadn't known that saving her family meant destroying someone else's. The sound of a bullet tearing through the air snapped her back to the present. It struck the rock near her shoulder, sending fragments flying. She ducked instinctively. "Keep moving," he shouted. They scrambled up the ridge, dirt sliding beneath their boots. Another shot rang out, closer this time. He turned and fired an arrow, swift, silent, deadly. One of the soldiers fell. The rest ducked behind their horses. For a moment, the chase slowed. When they reached the top, they collapsed behind a boulder, catching their breath. She looked at him, his chest rising and falling, the sunlight glinting on the sweat that traced the scars across his skin. She reached out without thinking, brushing dust from his shoulder. He caught her wrist, his eyes searching hers. "You're not like them," he said quietly. She froze. "You don't know me." His grip softened. "Maybe I don't need to." She wanted to believe that, but part of her knew the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. If he learned why she was really here, why she had found him, he would never forgive her. The guilt ate at her like fire beneath her ribs. She turned away, staring at the horizon where the soldiers regrouped below. "They'll come again," she said. "They won't stop until they have you." He looked out too, his expression darkening. "Then we make them regret it." He stood and began gathering dry brush to mask their tracks. She watched him move, focused, deliberate, every motion filled with quiet strength. He seemed to belong to the desert in a way she never could. When the sun finally dipped low enough to soften the light, they continued toward the well. Each step carried them deeper into uncertainty, but for the first time she didn't feel completely alone. That night, they camped near a hollow in the rocks. The stars burned above them, cold and bright. The wind had softened, carrying the faint smell of sage. She sat near the fire, her knees pulled close, staring at the flames. He sat across from her, sharpening his knife with slow, steady strokes. The sound of metal against stone filled the silence. After a while, he spoke. "You were crying when I found you," he said. "Who were you running from?" She hesitated. "Myself, maybe." His gaze didn't waver. "Now." She looked up at him, the flicker of the fire painting shadows across his face. "Now, I don't know what I'm running toward." He nodded, as if he understood. "The desert changes people," he said. "Out here lies don't last long." She felt the words sink deep. She wanted to tell him everything then, to confess the deal, the soldiers, the betrayal, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she said softly, "And what about you? What are you running from?" His hand stopped moving. He looked into the fire for a long time before answering. "A promise," he said finally. "One I couldn't keep." She waited for him to explain, but he didn't. The silence between them grew heavy, filled with things neither could say. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. She watched him turn away from the fire, his face half in shadow. For the first time, she saw the loneliness behind his calm. He wasn't just a fighter or a fugitive, he was a man carrying ghosts he could never bury. When she finally lay down, the stars blurred behind her tired eyes. The wind carried the faint rhythm of drums from far away, a memory, maybe, or a warning. She dreamed of fire, of soldiers marching, of a voice whispering her name through the smoke. And somewhere in that dream, she heard his words again. The desert changes people. By morning, she woke to find him gone. Panic seized her chest until she saw him returning with a canteen of water. He handed it to her silently, his eyes scanning the horizon. "They'll move at first light," he said. "We need to reach the canyon before they do." She nodded, trying to ignore the ache in her legs and the guilt that refused to fade. As they walked, she thought about what would happen when he learned the truth. Would he look at her the same way? Would he still believe she was different from the others? Each step forward felt like a lie waiting to break. The trail ahead twisted through the rocks, and beyond it, the land opened wide and endless. The soldiers were out there somewhere, chasing a shadow they wouldn't rest until they caught. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, she made a choice she didn't yet understand. She would protect him, even if it meant turning against everything she once believed in. The desert sun rose again, sharp and golden. Behind them, the faint sound of hoofbeats returned. Glanced back, his jaw tightening. She met his eyes, her hand tightening around the revolver. "If they find us," he said, "there won't be time to run." She took a breath, steady and certain now. "Then we don't run," she said. "Not anymore." The wind lifted the edge of her hair, carrying the scent of smoke on the air. Somewhere behind the horizon, danger was coming, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. The story between them was far from over, and the desert, silent and eternal, would bear witness to whatever came next. The trail curved between the rocks like a scar across the land. Each step forward brought them deeper into the heart of Apache territory, where few dared to go. The woman's breath came in short bursts, her throat dry and raw from dust. She glanced back once, her eyes catching the faint shimmer of movement on the horizon. The soldiers were still following, slow but steady, like wolves tracking wounded prey. The Apache walked ahead of her, quiet and alert, every motion sharp with purpose. The silence between them grew heavier with each mile, filled with questions neither could afford to ask. By midday, the sun blazed high and the air shimmered with heat. They stopped near a cluster of mesquite trees, their shade thin but enough to catch their breath. She sat on a rock, wiping her face with the edge of her sleeve. The Apache crouched beside the sand, pressing his hand to the ground. "They're closing in," he said. 6, maybe 7 riders. They'll reach the canyon before nightfall." His voice carried no panic, just a calm certainty that unsettled her. "What will you do?" she asked. He didn't look up. "What I must." She wanted to argue, to tell him there had to be another way. But she couldn't. She knew how soldiers worked, how they marched with orders that didn't leave space for mercy. They wouldn't take him alive. Her chest tightened at the thought. She was caught between two worlds, now the one she came from, and the one she was learning to see through his eyes. As they rested, her gaze drifted to his hands. They were scarred, rough, but steady. She wondered how many times those same hands had built fires, carved tools, held dying friends. He caught her staring and tilted his head slightly, almost a smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. "You look at me as if I'm already gone," he said softly. She looked away, her throat tightening. "Maybe I'm afraid you will be." Later, they reached a narrow valley where the ground dipped toward a dry riverbed. He led her down carefully, his steps sure. She stumbled once, and he caught her arm. For a moment, their eyes met. His were dark and endless, holding stories she could only guess. Then he released her and kept walking, leaving her heart beating faster than it should. They found the old well near sundown, half buried beneath sand and stone. Around it were signs of a camp long abandoned, ashes, broken pottery, and the faint scent of smoke trapped in the earth. "This was once a gathering place," he said quietly. before the army came. She ran her fingers along the cracked stones. What happened here? His gaze lingered on the horizon. They promised peace. Then they brought fire. He didn't say more, but the bitterness in his voice told her enough. She could almost see, if the soldiers riding in under the banner of truce, the smoke rising, the screams fading into the wind. She closed her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He looked at her, his face unreadable. Sorry doesn't bring back the dead. The words stung, but she didn't argue. As night fell, they built a small fire beside the well. The flames danced low, their light painting shadows across their faces. The Apache sat with his back to the fire, watching the darkness beyond. She knew he was listening for movement, for the sound of boots or hooves in the distance. She wanted to speak, to fill the silence, but every word she thought of felt too small. Finally he spoke. "You said they followed you," he said without turning. "But how did they know where to find me?" Her breath caught. The question she had feared was finally here. She hesitated, her fingers gripping the fabric of her skirt. "I don't know," she said too quickly. He turned his head slightly, his eyes catching the firelight. "Don't lie to me." Her heart pounded. The truth pressed against her chest like a blade. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. They told me it would end differently." His expression hardened. "What did they tell you?" She swallowed, her voice trembling. "That if I led them to you, they'd let my father go. He owes them money. He said this was the only way." The silence that followed was unbearable. Fire crackled softly, throwing sparks into the night. He didn't move, didn't speak. She wanted to reach for him to explain, but his stillness held her back. Finally he stood, his voice low and rough. "So it was all a lie?" She shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "No, it started as one, but not now, not anymore." He turned away, his fists clenched. "You brought death to me," he said. "It's my people." His words were heavy with anger, but beneath it she heard something else hurt. "You think I don't know what that means? You think I wanted this?" she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't have a choice." He faced her then, his eyes burning in the firelight. "There is always a choice." She didn't answer, because deep down she knew he was right. She could have walked away. She could have refused the money. But she hadn't. And now they were both trapped in the consequences. The tension between them hung thick, like the heat before a storm. Then far off, a sound cut through the night, the faint echo of a bugle. He stiffened. "They found us." She scrambled to her feet. "We can still move." "There's a cave on the far side of the ridge." He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where distant torches flickered like dying stars. They packed what little they had and began moving again, the fire dying behind them. The desert night was colder than she expected, the air sharp and thin. Each step echoed her guilt. She could feel his distance now, not just in space, but in spirit. Walked ahead, silent, his shoulders tense. She followed, unsure if he would ever look at her the same way again. When they reached the cave, he motioned for her to stay back. He entered first, checking the shadows before signaling her in. Inside, the air was cool and damp. She sank to the ground, exhausted. He stood near the entrance, listening. The sound of horses grew louder. They were close. She wanted to tell him that she would stay behind, that he should save himself, but before she could speak, he turned. "If they find us, they'll kill us both," he said. "Then we fight together." His tone was final. The soldiers' voices echoed faintly through the canyon, sharp and commanding. She could see their torches through the cave's narrow opening. Her heart raced as she loaded the revolver. He glanced at her, his jaw tight. "Do you even know how to shoot?" he asked quietly. "Well enough," she replied, though her hands trembled. They waited in silence, the air thick with tension. The sound of footsteps grew closer, echoing off the rocks. She felt the weight of the moment press down, heavy and suffocating. The Apache crouched beside her, knife in hand, his eyes calm but alert. She wanted to ask what would happen if they survived, if there was a future beyond this night. But the question died on her lips. Outside, a torchlight flickered against the cave wall. A soldier's voice called out, sharp and certain. "We know you're here. Come out, and maybe we'll let the girl live." She froze. He didn't move. His hand brushed hers briefly, a silent reassurance, before he stood and stepped toward the light. She grabbed his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "They'll kill you." He looked at her, his expression softer now, almost tender. They already tried. Before she could speak again, he was gone, stepping into the night. She could see his shadow framed by firelight, his silhouette steady against the torches. The soldiers shouted, guns raised. She held her breath, her finger on the trigger, ready to do what she must. The sound of the first shot tore through the canyon, then chaos. The echo of gunfire rolled across the rocks, blending with shouts and the roar of the wind. She pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding, torn between running and fighting. Every instinct told her to stay hidden, but her heart wouldn't let her. She rose, her revolver shaking in her hand, and stepped toward the light. The conflict that had begun in lies had now turned into something else, something raw, fierce, and unstoppable. And somewhere between the thunder of rifles and the cry of the desert, her story with the Apache was only just beginning. The night cracked open with gunfire. The echo bounced between the canyon walls, sharp and relentless, as sand and smoke filled the air. The woman's ears rang with the sound of it. The Apache moved like a shadow against the torchlight, swift and sure, his blade flashing once, then gone. The soldier dropped to the ground, another stumbled backward, firing blindly into the dark. She raised the revolver and squeezed the trigger. Dialed, the recoil jolted through her arm, the shot whistling past a soldier's shoulder. Her heart thudded so loud she could barely breathe. "Stay back," he shouted, but it was too late. She was already out of the cave, running toward him through the haze. The soldiers had surrounded them now, their torches flickering like dying stars. The desert air pulsed with tension, the smell of gunpowder thick and bitter. One of the soldiers shouted, "Order!" She recognized his voice. Captain Rourke. He was the one who had given her the pouch of silver. He was the one who had told her the lie. "Shoot the savage," he yelled. "The girl's of no use anymore." Her stomach turned cold. She aimed toward the voice and fired again, the shot grazing the captain's arm. Cursed and ducked behind a rock. The Apache turned to her, eyes blazing. "They won't stop," he said. "They'll come until none of us are left." He moved closer, his voice a rough whisper. "When I tell you to run, you go." She shook her head fiercely. "I'm not leaving you." His hand brushed her cheek, brief and rough. "You already did once. Don't do it again." Before she could answer, another shot rang out, shattering the stone above them. Dust rained down. He grabbed her hand and pulled her behind a fallen boulder. The soldiers advanced cautiously now, their torches bobbing like angry fireflies. She could hear their boots crunching the sand, their whispers carried by the wind. The Apache loaded an arrow, his movements calm despite the chaos. He loosed it, and a torch fell, plunging part of the canyon into darkness. He took that moment to move silent, precise, deadly. She crouched low, heart pounding, trying to steady her breath. Her fingers brushed against the revolver lying half-buried beside her. She thought of her father, of the night he'd begged her to take the soldier's deal. She thought of his shaking hands, of his voice cracking with shame. She had told herself it was to save him. But now, under the roaring sky, she knew it had been to save herself from guilt, from hunger, from fear. And yet here she was, fighting against the very men she had served. A hand grabbed her from behind. She gasped, struggling. But the soldier was stronger. His arm wrapped around her waist, dragging her backward. The revolver slipped from her grasp. "Got her," he shouted. She kicked, twisting, but his grip tightened.
Ow.
Then suddenly the man stiffened. His eyes widened in shock before he collapsed, an arrow buried deep in his back. The Apache appeared out of the shadows, breathing hard, his face streaked with dust. "Can you still run?" he asked. She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "Then move." They ran through the canyon, the sound of gunfire chasing them. The moon hung low, silver and cold. The ground beneath their feet shifted from sand to stone as they climbed toward the ridge. The Apache led the way, guiding her through narrow passes and winding paths that twisted like a snake through the cliffs. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she didn't stop. The night seemed endless. Every sound, every shadow felt alive. Behind them, the soldiers' torches grew smaller, but their voices still carried. "They're heading north," someone yelled. "Cut them off before they reach the ridge." She stumbled, and he caught her arm before she fell. "Careful," he said. "The ground is loose here." His voice was steady, but his breathing was heavy now, strained. She could see the blood seeping through the fabric of his shoulder, where a bullet had grazed him. "You're hurt," she said. "It's nothing," he replied, though. His steps faltered slightly. When they reached the top, the world opened wide before them. The desert stretched out like a sea of gold and ash. Far below, the soldiers were tiny specks, their torches moving like ants. For a moment, the wind was the only sound. She wanted to believe they had escaped, but he stood still, staring at the horizon. "They'll keep coming," he said quietly. "They'll follow the blood." She looked at his wound. "Then let me help you." He shook his head. "Can't. It's not just the blood on my skin thereafter. It's the blood I was born with." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm. "Then they'll have to kill me too, because I'm not letting them take you." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a faint, bitter smile, he said, "You talk like someone who's already lost everything." She opened her mouth to reply, but the distant echo of horses cut her off. The soldiers had found the trail again. He turned sharply, his jaw tightening. "We can't stay here," he said. "There's a cave near the plateaued ground from my people's time. We'll make our stand there." She hesitated. "A stand?" He met her eyes. "You think they'll stop hunting us?" They moved again, the wind biting colder as dawn crept near. The stars began to fade, and with them, her hope that morning might bring safety. The Apache's movements grew slower, his body weighed by exhaustion and blood loss, yet he pressed on. She followed close, her thoughts tangled between fear and determination. Every sound of hoofbeats behind them made her pulse quicken. When they finally reached the plateau, the land was quiet, almost sacred. Ancient carvings marked the stone walls, telling stories of lives long gone. The Apache paused, touching one of the symbols, a spiral carved deep into the rock. "My father brought me here once," he said softly. "Said this place keeps the spirits of those who fought for freedom." She looked at the carvings, at the way his hand lingered there. "Then maybe they'll watch over us too," she said. He glanced at her, a flicker of warmth crossing his face before fading back into focus. "Get inside," he said. "They'll be here soon." She obeyed, moving into the cave. It was larger than she expected, the air cool and still. The walls glowed faintly from the light outside, and in that glow she saw drawings, figures of warriors, animals, and a sun rising over the hills. For a moment she forgot the danger and simply stared. Then he came in behind her, dragging a fallen branch to block the entrance. He sank down beside the wall, breathing hard. She knelt beside him, tearing a strip from her skirt to wrap his shoulder. "You should have told me you were bleeding this bad," she said. "Would it have changed anything?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "I would have been scared sooner." He almost laughed, but the sound turned into a grimace of pain. Outside, the faint sound of approaching horses returned. She froze, her hand tightening around the revolver. The Apache lifted his head. "They've found us," he said quietly. She could see the flicker of firelight through the cracks. The soldiers were spreading out, surrounding the plateau. The captain's voice carried above the wind. "You can't hide forever, Taza. Surrender now, and we might let the woman live." She felt his gaze on her. "He means to break you," he said. "Don't listen." Her voice shook. "They'll kill you if we don't do something." He nodded slowly. "And I'll make sure they remember it." He stood, steadying himself against the wall, and reached for his knife. She grabbed his arm. "You can't go out there alone." His eyes softened. "It's not about me anymore. It's about what they'll take if we let them win." The soldier's footsteps drew closer. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with smoke and dust. She could feel every heartbeat, every breath. He turned to her once more, his voice low. "If I don't make it, you keep going north. There's a river beyond the cliffs. Follow it, and you'll find safety." She shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "Don't talk like that." He reached out, his fingers brushing hers. "He said. Once you didn't know what you were running toward. Now you do." Before she could answer, the first torch was thrown into the cave. Flames licked at the dry wood, blocking the entrance. Smoke curled upward, choking the air. The Apache grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the back of the cave. It was a narrow passage there, barely wide enough for one person. "Go," he said. "It leads outside." She coughed, shaking her head. "Not without you." He pushed her forward. "Go." The fire roared louder. She could hear the soldiers shouting, their boots pounding closer. She hesitated one last time, her eyes locking with his. In that single look, everything was said. the guilt, the forgiveness, the love neither of them had dared to name. Then, before she could move, the cave exploded with light as the soldiers broke through the flames. She turned toward the passage. But the last thing she saw before the smoke swallowed her was him standing tall, blade in hand, facing the fire and the men who had come to destroy him. The echo of his battle cry carried through the canyon, raw and defiant, a sound that would stay with her forever. The climax was near, and the desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Waiting to see who would fall and who would rise from the ashes, the smoke thickened until she could barely see her hands. Her lungs burned as she crawled through the narrow passage, rocks scraping her palms, the heat chasing her every move. Behind her, the sounds of battle roared like thunder. She wanted to turn back to run to him, but she remembered his words go north. So she forced herself forward until the light ahead widened, spilling into the cool dawn beyond the rocks. She stumbled out, gasping, falling to her knees as the first pale light of morning crept over the desert. For a moment the world was silent. Only the crackle of distant fire reached her ears. She looked back toward the cave, half buried in smoke, her heart twisting. The thought that he might still be in there fighting, burning, or already gone through her like a blade. She pressed her forehead to the ground and whispered his name, though the wind carried it away. When the soldiers' shouts grew faint, she moved, forcing herself to her feet. Her legs trembled, but she kept walking, following the slope that led north. The desert stretched endlessly before her, the rising sun painting everything gold and red. Each step was heavy with fear and grief, but also with something stronger, a promise she didn't yet know how to keep. She had betrayed him once. She wouldn't betray his memory, too. Hours passed before she found the river. It wasn't much, just a thin line of water cutting through the earth, but it was life. She fell to her knees and drank, the coolness easing her throat. For a while she stayed there, trying to gather her thoughts. The soldiers were likely dead or scattered. The desert had a way of claiming those who didn't belong to it. Still, she knew she couldn't stay, not with the memories echoing through her mind. The fire, the gunshots, the sound of his voice telling her to run. As the day wore on, she followed the river until the land began to change. The harsh sand softened into soil, scattered with green. She found traces of old paths prints, wagon tracks, proof that people had once passed this way. By dusk, she reached a small ridge overlooking the valley. From there, she could see the faint line of smoke far behind her, marking where the cave had been. It rose like a ghost against the sky, fading slowly into the horizon. She stayed there through the night, unable to sleep. The stars above looked clearer than she'd ever seen them, stretching in every direction like the pages of a story she could finally read. She thought about him, the Apache, who had saved her when he should have left her to die, who had shown her what it meant to stand for something even when the world was burning. He had told her once that the desert changed people. Now she understood. When morning came, she started walking again, following the faint trail north until she found a small settlement. The town was little more than a cluster of wooden shacks, a saloon, and a water tower leaning to one side. The people looked at her with a mix of suspicion and pity. Her torn dress, the soot on her skin, the hollow look in her eyes told enough of her story. She found work in a trading post, helping with ledgers and supplies. She said little, and no one asked much. Weeks passed. The world outside her grief moved on. Soldiers rode through the town once, their uniforms dusty, their eyes hard. They spoke of the Apache ambush near the southern ridge. "We got him," one of them said, his voice loud with pride. "The savage fought to the end, took 5 men with him before he fell." The words hit her like a stone to the chest. She kept her head down, pretending not to hear, but her hands shook until the ink bled across the page she was writing. That night, she sat alone behind the trading post, staring at the moon rising over the hills. She tried to imagine him lying somewhere in that canyon, but her heart refused to believe he was gone. He had been too strong, too alive. She whispered to the wind, "If you're out there, I'll find you." The wind answered only with silence. Still, she made up her mind. If the next wagon left town, she would go back. A month later, she returned to the canyon. The trail was harder now, the land burned and scarred. The cave was gone, collapsed into a mound of stone and ash. She walked the ground slowly, her boots kicking through the debris until she found something half buried in the dirt, A feather tied with leather cord was his. She held it against her chest, her tears finally falling. In that moment, she realized she didn't need to see his body to know he was still with her. Strength, his defiance, his kindness, they were carved into the desert itself. She built a small marker there, using stones and branches. Around it, she placed what little she carried, a piece of her torn dress, the revolver he had given back to her, and the feather. Then she knelt, whispering the words he once said, "The desert keeps the spirits of those who fought for freedom." The wind shifted, soft and warm, brushing her face as though answering her prayer. From that day on, she stayed near the river. She built a small shelter out of driftwood and clay, living quietly, tending to travelers who passed through. People began to call her the woman by the river. Some said she was a widow waiting for her lost husband. Others claimed she was a ghost herself. She never corrected them. When people asked her why she stayed, she would smile faintly and say, "Because someone once told me that the desert changes people." And he was right. Seasons came and went. The war between the soldiers and the Apaches slowly faded into history, replaced by new towns and new names. But sometimes when the wind howled across the canyon, it carried a sound, faint, distant, like the echo of a war cry. On those nights, she would stand by the water, her heart full of memory, da-da-da-da, and whisper into the darkness, "You're free now." Years later, a group of riders passed through and stopped by her camp. Among them was a young Apache boy with eyes dark as the night sky. She offered them water. The boy stared at her wrist, where she wore the leather cord tied to the old feather. He said something softly in his language, then looked up at her with wonder. "My grandfather told me about the woman who helped him escape the fire," he said. "He said she had eyes like the desert rain." Her breath caught. "Your grandfather?" The boy nodded. "He lived by the northern river until last winter. He told us the story of how he fought the soldiers alone so the woman could live. He said she would always carry his spirit." Her eyes filled with tears she hadn't shed in years. She smiled, her voice breaking. "He's alive?" The boy nodded again, smiling shyly. He said the land gave him peace before the end." She looked toward the canyon, her heart light for the first time in so long. The desert shimmered under the sun, endless and golden. She closed her eyes, whispering a quiet thank you. The years of guilt and pain eased like dust carried away by the wind. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned to fire, she walked along the riverbank one last time. The sound of water and wind filled the air, and she felt him there beside her, his presence, calm and strong. She spoke softly, her voice barely above the rustle of the reeds. "I kept my promise. I found peace, just like you wanted." When night fell, the stars returned, scattered like embers across the dark. She sat by the fire until it burned low, then lay down beside it, the feathers still in her hand. As she drifted to sleep, the last thing she heard was the whisper of the wind through the canyon, the same song he had once sung by the fire. By dawn, the camp was quiet. The fire had gone out, but the feathers still lay there, untouched by the wind. And somewhere far away, the desert breathed, holding the memory of two souls who had found each other in a world that tried to tear them apart. The land kept their story alive, told in the silence between storms, carried in the dust, never forgotten.